what really led to the creation of the African Pavilion, and what does it mean for diversity, especially within Cybos?
So we've been talking to Swift for a while about increasing African participation in Cybos, and that for a couple of reasons. We want it to be a meeting place for people in the payments industry, including in Africa, to learn from each other. And there's a great need, I think, to bring expertise, new ideas, innovation, both from Africa into the payments community and from the payments community back into Africa. That two-way street is very powerful. So to try and do that, we thought, let's have a meeting place, a hub, if you like, in Cybos for the African community. And some partners were very kind enough to help us out with that. So that led to this first year of the African Pavilion.
Absolutely brilliant. So I've also got to ask yourself, what brought you to the African Pavilion?
Well, I'm very excited about the topic generally of financial inclusion, trying to give people everywhere in emerging markets in Africa access to quality financial services. And I think we all play a role collectively, different aspects of the same role of really creating an enabling environment, particularly for entrepreneurs, for artisans and traders and farmers to have access to quality, frictionless payments using a mobile device or using any type of interaction to be a vehicle for economic development, wealth creation and jobs. So I think that's what's really fundamentally what we have all in common and our common mission. And I think we all play a different role in that, and I think it's very important.
And could I ask that the central bank's a view on the African Pavilion and what it really means to be right at the hub of effectively Cybos 2019?
As a financial market infrastructures, this is where other financial market infrastructures in Africa are. So what a better place to interact as FMIs on one platform and we solve the issues for Africa. This is the place.
When it comes to VocaLink, obviously we're talking about creating that kind of payments landscape through various different technologies. What does VocaLink bring to the African Pavilion?
So what we bring at the heart of it is a strategy of moving money through payment hubs. So we foresee those hubs in different regions of the world. So we have a hub already up and running in Peru for the Latin America region. We have another hub that we're developing in Asia for the Asia Pacific region, and another one we're about to start work on in Europe. So the missing region that we don't have a hub in yet is Africa. And if ever there was a region that is ideally suited for some kind of regional payments hub, it's absolutely Africa, with 500 million mobile subscribers across the continent, very diverse ecosystem, very diverse sets of population around the continent, but a common drive really for innovation, for creativity, for greater financial inclusion. If we can work with our partners to provide a backbone of sort of ability to move money around seamlessly, that would be an absolutely fantastic thing to be able to do for the continent, and would enable so many other things to go right and go well.
I think the whole continent is, as we've already kind of discussed, a hub of real emerging economies, but also emerging technologies. So, I mean, how do you, from a central bank point of view, look to kind of regulate and embrace that technology while making sure that people are still going to be at the heart of innovation going forward?
Yes, the South African Reserve Bank has recently started a fintech unit with an intention to create accelerators and hackathons and to engage young people to come up with ideas, to co-create with the industry. So we realize that following and chasing the industry is no longer, the right thing to do. So to co-create and influence, when the technologies are coming up, so that both objectives that are commercial and those that are talking to our regulations are met by the same technology.
From the bank's point of view, how do you look to kind of facilitate this by investing and innovating within your own walls, but also bringing in other partners to collaborate and making sure you stay at the front of innovation?
Well, I think that the role that fintech plays is really to try and drive access. But what I think is really fantastic about what we're all doing here in the Africa Pavilion is celebrating the successes of Africa. Oftentimes this broader global community believes that Africa has nothing but to learn from established markets, and I can tell you it's quite the inverse. You know, the expression, necessity is the mother of invention. The kinds of innovation and driving solutions to solve problems in Africa have brought out the talent of Africa. Local indigenous financial institutions, alternative financial institutions using modern, very, very modern fintech to solve complicated problems that, like the mobile revolution, it started in emerging markets. I think Africa is positioned in payments to leapfrog and take the world into the next generation much faster than it's going to happen in Europe.
That's true. I think we can say the problem is not the availability of ideas and entrepreneurialism to do something about those ideas. The challenge in Africa, as always, is a fragmentation challenge, that there are 54 countries, there are thousands of cultures, and the challenge is always how to get some collaboration and coordination to happen to get the best out of the great things that are happening there. So that's a sort of symbolic, really, of the Africa Pavilion, that if we could do a little bit more collaboration, we'll get much more bang for our enthusiasm, if you like.
I completely agree. I mean, one thing we've seen from the APAC region is, despite the embrace of technology, it's still a very fragmented payments market, many different currencies. In Africa, obviously, with the use of mobile technology instead of more paper-based currencies, I mean, is there a chance, as we've already mentioned, to leapfrog other areas and industries, especially in the payments industry?
I think potentially there is. You've got a very strong culture of innovation and creation in Africa, very strong fintech community, and an acknowledgement really that the leapfrogging is necessary. It isn't possible to evolve slowly in a continent as large as Africa. We can't put the fixed infrastructures in place that some of the other continents have benefited from for many years. So we have to do something radically different, but we also have to bring in some of the technologies that we've developed elsewhere and proven elsewhere. Now, if we can synthesize the two and get the resilience, the sort of culture of always-on availability, a standard set of payment types, interoperability between currencies, some of those problems have been solved elsewhere in a small way. We have the opportunity to do that in a big way here, marry it with all of the innovation and creativity that we've got within the continent, and you could achieve something really, really special.
Absolutely brilliant. And I want to ask, for BankservAfrica, how's the African Pavilion really kind of shone a light on all this and really brought people together to kind of showcase the best of that?
Yeah, so it's been initially an experiment, to be honest, to say, can we create a bit of a community feeling? The SWIFT guys are very happy, though. They tell me that they've got 1,100 delegates from the Africa Middle East area, so that's a good number to work with. I think it's partly because we're in London, and London is an easier access point, I think, for the continent. But more importantly, from my perspective, we've had a great deal of interest from many of those delegates about being more involved in the pavilion next year and using it as their base of operation. Yeah. So that's really exciting.
We're here at Sibos. Next year, the next time it's going to be in Boston. I mean, what do you think the African Pavilion can bring there and really showcase next year, hypothetically, to really showcase? What are we going to be seeing in the next couple of months within the African continent when it comes to payment technology, when it comes to financial technology, that people are going to actually be wowed by?
So I think the sky's the limit, to be honest. I think it would be great for us to be able to pick some really innovative technological solutions and demo them. This is all, blue sky thinking at the moment, right? But it would be lovely to be able to have a couple of demos to demonstrate some of that capability, to actually put some meat around the idea of being a link point, a hub. Can we provide a sort of brokering service that brings together people with complementary needs and products for the African community? I think all of that sort of stuff is possible if we can get a level of support.
Now, when it comes to, obviously, we hear a lot about innovation being created by private companies, especially in Asia, innovation being kind of fostered by regulation in Europe, and a mixture of the two in the States. I mean, what would you characterize the regulatory standpoint when it comes to innovation in Africa?
That's yours.
Yes. I mean, we're moving towards changing legislation to give wider access. And once that happens, it's going to unearth a whole lot of potential from the private companies that we're talking about. So including non-banks is the next best thing that's going to happen to Africa. Give it a year. I don't want to overpromise, but give it a year. We're going to see that unlocking.
Okay, brilliant. Now, as a general kind of question, I mean, we've talked a little bit about interoperability. How much do you think that is going to change over the next coming years? Especially, obviously, we're seeing in the APAC region a little bit more of that. But do you think we're going to see applications from private companies starting to offer that universal access throughout various different countries going forward in Africa?
See, I have a slightly different view of that. I think there's an interlinking opportunity. So there will be a lot of network innovation and a lot of both publicly sponsored and privately organised networks of various kinds. There already are, large telephone networks and all sorts of things. But getting them to connect to each other is probably the quickest way to build a broader level of interoperability. And the other layer of that in Africa is that there are a number of development associations for the different regions, eastern, southern, western, central, northern. And I think they provide a bit of a locus for standardisation of regulation, standardisation of economic support for these kinds of things, and a sort of place to talk about bringing together some of these linkages.
Now, obviously, we've talked about how having an element of unbanked population being, actually quite positive, especially when it comes to leapfrogging previous payment technologies. But how do you think we can increase the level of, banked people within the African continent to ultimately improve financial inclusion and financial education?
If I may take that one. The World Bank has had banner headlines for years about 2.6 million unbanked, now 2 million, now 1.6 billion, unbanked in the world. And de facto it was understood that, well, if somebody has a phone and they have an e-wallet, that they're banked. Hardly the case. The dormancy rates on mobile e-wallets is extreme, and you count it to be active if it's had one transaction in 90 days. That's not banked. Banked means meaningful engagement in the financial sector. So you need quality, relevant, affordable, diverse products that are useful to people, that they can use to leverage their assets and to save, to convert tangible assets to financial assets, and you need intermediation. So I think this sort of big tech, fintech, banking triangle needs to be really managed well, and I think the intermediation is essential. The customer journey of the financial institution cannot be disrupted and have the consumer products drive this. I think you need to also have intermediation. So I think it's a more complex and important issue when you talk about financial inclusion. You're really talking about financial markets deepening and not a superficial skin to give people payment products or things from the internet or online gambling and all sorts of crazy things that are out there. They're not helpful. It's more fundamental, and I think that we all have a role to play, and I think the regulators have a very important role to play in terms of setting the context for that.
Now, following up on that, so that's a very interesting point about wallets effectively actually just laying dormant, being created but not used. Do you think that's going to be an increasing trend, or is it just an issue currently due to lack of financial education? And we're going to start seeing that picked up eventually in the future.
I don't think it's just education. I think it's about having the right providing products with the right user experience so people can actually engage with them, pick them up and use them. So I wouldn't like to sort of predict it strongly, but people, I think, will have a run out of tolerance for wallets that only have limited utility. And what they want is the ability to transact where they want to transact, safely, securely and quickly. And if we can provide the right financial infrastructure to do that, actually I think we'll be able to move away from wallets and move into real banking, which gives you a proper financial footprint, allows you to apply for small business loans, insurance products, and creates that deep relationship that Murray was talking about.
And of course, price points are important as well. So we've got to get services down to a price point where it's accessible for the underbanked community. And let me just add, that's not just a financial services issue, that's a data and a telco issue as well. So you've got to have good coverage and you've got to have it at a low cost.
I mean, in some jurisdictions, you see for e-wallets, you need to exit to cash to be able to utilize it. That's an impediment on its own.
Yeah. That really is critical. You know, you've got to remove those kind of barriers to really allow more financial players. So, I mean, in terms of, I guess, we've kind of slightly talked about it, but the value-added product you can have on top of a wallet, do you think it's hit critical mass in the African continent, or do you think we're going to start seeing, value-added services on these kind of tech companies kind of lure people away from the banks? Or do you think that the banks are actually in a good enough position to actually create their own kind of digital wallet effectively and still remain at the core of financial services?
Certainly from my perspective, it varies a lot from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. I think there are communities where the banking investment and infrastructure is such that it will be pretty well able to expand into other communities. There are also areas where that's not the case, and in fact there's already a significant risk that the financial services environment is going to move, at least the consumer environment will tend to move away from the banks, and we've seen that in a number of jurisdictions outside Africa in recent years. Although, interestingly enough, there is an opportunity for the initial financial education, the initial service offering to be non-bank, but for then the banking community to come along behind, if you like, and add a depth and a richness to that. And so you've seen the banking rate in Kenya, for example, go up post-M-Pesa, which is an interesting observation, right?
Following that, is there, as you mentioned, for very specific regions, 50 or so countries, is there a worry that one individual country or a couple, maybe Rwanda or South Africa, could start accelerating to a point where they can start dictating terms to the rest of the community and everyone has to follow that financial regulatory body or anything like that?
You have to recognize there's economic zones in Africa, and those economic zones have a natural, historic, cultural cohesion. So those economic zones have their own administrative and political infrastructure for cooperation. So I think you're talking about zones, not countries. And within those zones, you may have one sort of economic powerhouse where the center may be, but everyone participates in those schemes. So it's really about getting a common agreement to standards of interaction within those zones. Yeah. And then those zones themselves will interact with each other for a more pan-African interaction and global interaction.
Interesting. I guess talking about that though, breaking down these borders, creating a kind of pan-African kind of payment scheme, is that something that could ever be conceived, and is that something that we should be talking about?
It's actually being talked about now. I think it's got a long way to go, that conversation, but there's already an awareness, certainly at central bank level and amongst the infrastructure providers in the country, that would be a genuine, huge benefit if we could somehow interoperate across the continent. There's a lot of work to do, though.
I mean, it's like the United States.
Yeah.
You think of the United States as a unified bloc. It is far, far from that, and it's taken ages. Yeah. It's taken eons to get to be able to do,
Absolutely.
To have a Pan-American.
In fact, with the AACB, which is the African Association for Central Banks, we're already running 2 projects to connect the regions for high-value payments and to work on a mobile payment framework.
So it's effectively, it's completely, effectively, as we've used the phrase leapfrog, but you can see it completely dodging digital and just going straight to mobile. And I guess that's where the regulatory board is effectively honed in on for the future. Yes,
and that's where we seek to harmonize regulation so that we are one region after all.
And from Vocaliq's point of view, what is, obviously you've got hubs in APAC, in Europe and the Americas. For a very mobile, friendly continent like Africa, what's your role in still creating those kind of those push payments through potentially card use in the future?
Yeah, our goal really is to be able to provide a whole variety of payment solutions, and what works in a given country or a given region will depend on a variety of factors, not least the starting point for that region, because everywhere is different. I think Africa, if we can get a vision of being able to pay for anything anywhere and have the money flow back to where it needs to flow back to smoothly with the right kind of regulatory environment, the right banking environment in terms of know your customer, anti-money laundering, all the other wonderful things that we have to put in the way of moving money around just like that, we can provide the technology today. The technology is not the challenge, really. The challenge is in getting the regulatory environment such that everybody is comfortable, getting the exchange rates right, getting the international standards right, so that we can actually move money safely, simply, quickly at the right price. And it's easy to say, tough to do when you're talking about a continent as huge as Africa is.
I mean, one of the biggest challenges we have right now, the SADC RTGS is positioned as a multi-currency, but there are no indices to convert the domestic currencies of the 15 countries. So conversion has to go to dollar back to another country's conversion. So those are the things we need to solve for.
Well, I think that opens up a very interesting question that we often hear in the fintech and financial services industry is, distributed ledger technology, or is blockchain and cryptocurrency. I mean, does that surely have a massive role to play in kind of breaking down some of the barriers of these 50 countries?
I think everyone's got a different opinion, to be honest with you. It's a tough one. I don't think there's very much doubt that non-fiat or private currencies, if you like, so they don't have to be crypto, they don't have to be blockchain, but the emergence of technological capacity to do that is becoming greater and greater as the world's becoming more networked. How much more than a sort of an additional capability that sits on the side of the mainstream system, and how much they will start to take over from existing fiat systems is really hard to predict right now. I think the practical point for people like us is we need to allow for that as an option, and then the economy will do what the economy will do. These things will work their way through, right?
It's sort of like, blockchain the idea is it is somehow going to break down the central registries that we have for deposits. I think is a long way off. I think we have a long way to go just in presenting good interaction with existing infrastructure before these conversations start to happen. You're not going to get a central securities registry to disappear because you now have a blockchain record. But it's certainly a path to follow and to understand.
Brilliant. I mean, is it something that you would potentially like to see being implemented in Africa, or is it something that you would? There has to be something before then.
We're already moving with the proof of concept for a CBDC, but anything else as a central bank, we see it as a crypto asset, not money, and a store of value. So it is something that we're interested in seeing, because market forces will force you to go a particular direction. So a view from the central bank is not necessarily the correct or the right view going forward. So we're taking on what is happening on the ground, and we're going to be forced to follow suit.
We have a number of real-life blockchain applications. I think we have more blockchain patents than any other company. However, we also believe there's an awful long way to go on current technologies before blockchain will hit prime time and the kind of volume and performance that will be necessary for a hub for a region, for example. So I think at the moment there is an awful long way to go in terms of converting cash transactions into digital, bringing people, consumers, into the financial fold properly, and offering them the right ways to exchange money. It doesn't need blockchain to do that. It needs a bunch of other work that we're all very actively engaged on.
Education.
Mm-hmm. Education, yes. Yeah. Brilliant. I was expecting far more of a kind of diverse opinion on that, but it seems that we were quite unanimous on that in the end.
Yeah, so I think the gut feel is that it would be a big play to assume that we can use some kind of cryptocurrency as the answer to the complex problems of Africa, right? There's really good network technologies and a lot of great work that can be done without waiting for that sort of magic bullet, So, yeah.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.